Welcome to day 5. You've got bees, and what the buzz do you do now? So here's years of bee husbandry training and skills in just 15 to 20 minutes. It's my lean overview of what your key responsibilities are going to be as a beginner beekeeper, and here they are. Number 1, inspections. Number 2, feeding. And number 3 is pest management and control. So let's go. On regular inspections, they are key to ensuring that the hive is healthy and thriving. There are 2 types of these. Internal and external inspections provide a great amount of detail to summarize what's going on with your colony. So why external inspections? These involve doing forage accounts, providing you a quick fire summary of the ongoings inside the hive. 5 main benefits of this external inspection is that number 1, you can keep records of how many foragers come and go in 60 seconds. Of those foragers, how many of them are actually pollen jockeys? In other words, the ones coming back, how many of them got pollen sacs that are full? This translates into the demand for the feeding of the larvae inside the hive, which then can give you an indication of what colony size there is and how well the colony is doing. The more pollen jockeys are returning over the amount of the forager count in 60 seconds, the higher the demand inside the colony. And therefore you may need to do some maintenance and brood, especially brood maintenance. So number 3 is how many are leaving at the same period, in the same time period. So you take another 60 seconds and count all the bees that are leaving the colony. That gives you an indication of turnover inside the colony. Like what could the population be inside the hive itself. Number 4, keep the count during the day at about 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. This is probably the best time of the day for the bees to be foraging, leaving and going and coming and going, and keep it the same time whenever you do these kind of inspections. Number 5, the higher the count, in both of these scenarios of the 60 seconds, generally speaking, the higher the colony population is going to end up being, and the stronger the population, the colony is going to be too. So let's talk about internal inspections now. You've got to start these by checking the brood frames for larvae, eggs, other signs of a healthy colony. So what are those? Number 1 is a healthy queen bee. If you've got a queen right colony, generally speaking, you're going to have a healthy colony. And how do we do that? Well, find the queen herself. If you haven't marked her, maybe a bit difficult to find her. Usually she could be she's going to be under the lid if you're in a nook box or a catch box, and if you're just in a brood chamber, give enough smoke time. You got to give them about 2.5 to 4 minutes of smoke time before you open up, and she should be underneath the lid, especially in a nook chamber. Find her and check that her wings are okay, check that she's mobile and she's moving around and there's no other signs of any kind of injury. If you can't find the queen, it's not a train smash. Point number 2 is that you want to be looking out for the plenty of eggs and larvae. If you've got a great brood pattern, and we got a video on this in the channel, so have a look at that for brood patterns, how to tell when you have a great brood pattern with eggs and larvae on a brood frame, then you know that you've got a good queen as well. Number 3 is that you're looking for ample stores of honey and pollen, especially where you have in the brood frame, you're going to have a small amount, about 2 centimeters of honey along the top there. And along the sides, intermittently, you're going to have some bee pollen in place as well. And all of this is used for that particular frame by nurse bees to feed the larvae and the eggs. It's a good sign if you've got that. Number 4, conditions of the frames, the combs, and the hive bodies themselves. While you're doing an external inspection, another thing you could be looking at is for any gaps, any holes in your hive itself. All of the hive bodies aligned, or is the floor and the lid aligned with the rest of the hive itself? Is the super aligned? If you've got one, is the queen excluder aligned, and so the propolis tray. So check on those sort of things. Also make sure that if you've got an entrance blocker, that's in place and it's placed correctly, etc. Make sure that there aren't any dead bees lying outside on the floor either. And also check for ants. So we'll talk about pests later. Number 5, look for signs of diseases or pests, as mentioned. Number 6 is ensure that the bees have enough room to expand and store excess nectar. This is probably where a lot of beekeepers, beginner beekeepers, fall short, is that they don't give the bees enough space in time. And by adding super chambers for honey storage, and this perfect time to do this is when your number of brood frames are at stage 8. So you've got 8 built-up brood frames in the brood chamber, or if you're in a nook box, then you've got to be looking at 4 out of 6 frames. If you've got that, you should probably be transferring the frames over into a brood chamber. If you've got 7, 8 brood frames in a brood chamber, then you should be adding a super onto that as well. So those are the timelines. So here we go. Let's lead into timelines. Brood frame drawn out every 10 days on average for a fair or average quality standard colony. Super frame drawn out, built and filled every 7 to 10 days on average for the first time round. Stronger colonies can do this faster. When you're refilling honey frames, however, we discussed this on honey harvesting in day 6, so check that out when that's ready, is normally between 3 to 7 days, and it's highly dependent on the nectar flow and also obviously the strength of the colony itself as well. I've actually had colonies that I've just put on a wet super, which has just been a harvested super frames, put it back on a hive, and they've refilled it within 12 days. So it's phenomenally quick when there's a nectar flow and you've got already built out and drawn a comb on a frame, and all you've done is taken off the caps to harvest it. So that's a phenomenal way of being able to really take advantage of getting an additional honey harvest on a colony by just giving them back the empty frames that you just harvested in an extractor, which we do sell at the shop. So then point number 7, but probably the most vital thing of actually keeping your hives healthy, arguably, is brood maintenance. And it's generally speaking what beginner beekeepers aren't necessarily aware of or understand how to do, but it's vitally important that when a frame in the brood chamber matures after a season of intense and repetitive egg laying, you have to remove at least 1, maybe even 2 of the brood frames with the oldest comb in it, extract it completely from the frame itself. In other words, you remove all the comb that's inside that frame and then renew it with new wax sheet or a wax strip and place it back in the position you removed it from. So why do we do this? It provides the queen bee with new and fresh comb to lay eggs in, as over time old comb leads to disuse because the queen can no longer lay eggs in it. And if that's allowed to continue, what ends up happening is that the entire colony's ability to be able to lay and create new workforce diminishes over time, and then eventually the bees will actually abscond. So let's avoid that by making sure that we keep point number 7 high on our priority list whenever we do an inspection. But obviously, as I say, it only needs to take place once a year, usually around August in Southern Africa. So feeding bees is the second most important thing. And although in South Africa we usually have quite a temperate climate, other than maybe a couple of months in the dead of winter, number 1 is we're going to be feeding the bees with sugar syrup. Okay, it's a mixture which is optional to keeping your bees nourished in the winter. If they're a strong enough colony and they've been around for at least a year, usually the bees will be able to make it through without much feeding, although it does help them if you can give them some sugar water, especially if there's black frost or a really serious cold front for an extended period of time, like over 10 days. But the best recipe for feeding honeybees is an equal parts sugar and water. Heating the mixture is the easiest one to make until the sugar is completely dissolved. The mixture should be cool before placing it in feeders, that's either internal feeders or external feeders, which we have at the shop, given to the bees. You can also, I used to use old jiffy bags and just fill those up, not completely full, about 80% full, lie them flat on empty super chamber, and then poke it with a little drawing pin in the corner and let it seep out, and the bees will eat it from there. That's the budget version of feeding in internal feeders. So use it, don't use it. But there are negative outcomes for feeding, and number 1 is that you overfeed your bees. You can cause them dysentery and then they die. Number 2, and I think this is probably even more important actually at the end of the day, in the long run anyways, is that you have a dilution of your honey with sugar and syrup. Okay, so you can compromise what you think you have is real honey in your harvesting, and in your jars could actually be half made up, or whatever portion of that could be made up of actually fake honey or syrup, which we completely want to avoid 100%. So know what your feeding goals are when you're wanting to feed. And number 1 goal for this is that you provide sustenance or nectar substitute as the carbohydrates for the bees as a mock honey. And this is the focus really on this, is that you want to do winter feeding. Okay, you're not doing it for any other reason. And the best ratio here is actually a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's a bit of a thicker solution. You've got 2 kilograms of sugar, which is white sugar, don't use brown, to 1 liter of water. Boil it again, mix it, and then you can let it cool, and then you can use it. Goal number 2 is strictly to encourage brood production, and by that I mean you want egg laying when you have the following reasons to do so. There's 3 main reasons that you want to be able to encourage brood production any given time of the year. This is more of a practice sort of thing over any time of year. It's not specific to winter feeding, but here they are. Number one is when you want to do splits and you want to expand the bee worker population before you split the colony. Okay. Number two, you can use it for pollination replenishment. So when your bees are out doing pollination work as an intermediate to advanced beekeeper, they get depleted. They don't have enough food sources because of the excess number of bees in any given space of area for the orchard or the crop that they're on. So you do need to remove them from that space and then feed them to replenish them, and then you can take them back again a week or two later. Number three is actually pre-preparing for a nectar flow. So you basically like priming the pump, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that if you're feeding the bees about 25 days to 30 days before you expect a really good nectar flow, perfect timing for that would be August every year, because that's kind of like the end of the winter. And so you start the beginning of August, you start feeding them the 1-to-1 ratio, where you want a brief, remember the focus here is a brief population growth, okay? And that is to be able to take, in this particular case, you're preparing for the nectar flow of spring. So what you don't want to do is you don't want the bees to basically use the biggest time of year that there's a nectar flow on, generally speaking, in springtime, in order to expand what you want, and then use those resources to expand rather than to create excess honey and excess resources for you as a beekeeper and for themselves as well. So what we want to do is we want to pre-prime that and basically take it back about 30 days to the beginning of August, feed them then 1-to-1 ratio, get them to start laying eggs, and you're encouraging brood production, okay? So that by the time they come out, they're ready to actually work with a much larger workforce and take advantage of that nectar flow at that point from that position. Number three is the pest management. So finally, let's talk about pest control, which is essential. It's important to inspect the hive for any signs of pests, obviously while you're doing your normal inspections, including varroa mites, beetles, ants, and wax moth. Those are the main ones we're actually looking for. So if you spot any of those, it's important to take action quickly, and you can use a variety of treatments to control the pests, okay, and to manage them. So let's get into those. Ants, you can have Hive stands for ants with oil in cups. We sell those at our store in Centurion at BeeWareOnline online. You can use nippet and you can use baby powder. The nippet and baby powder, you're not going to let those anywhere near your beehives, inside the beehives. You don't want it on your bees or in your bees or on the surface of the colony, okay? You put it around the floor. So read the instructions, follow those instructions, and that will help to get rid of the ants. The other pest that you want to be looking at is the small hive beetle. It is indigenous to South Africa, so our bees can kind of control it to an extent. It does decimate a lot of the European and American bees that are now subject, and even Australia, they have the small hive beetle there as well. So it's now becoming an issue where those colonies can't handle it very well, and they get decimated by the small hive beetle. But our bees can kind of live with it because it is indigenous to us. But what you can do to manage it is we do sell a variety of beetle traps at our store in Centurion. So check the description below. You can catch, and then basically what happens is that the small hive beetle get trapped in the small hive beetle trap, obviously, and then you can just discard that and replace it back in the hive on a regular basis when you're doing your inspections, your internal inspections. Another pest is going to be the wax moth, and with this one you physically remove the moth itself, but more importantly is actually going to be removing the larvae when you do find them. If you find them, you want to remove and freeze the frames that the larvae were on, and that's going to kill any eggs that you can't find or see by naked eye. And then you might want to also use entrance reducers, but not so much in the hot summer season, so that you can allow good ventilation for your bees and access as well to the larger workforce. And that's how we kind of look at handling wax moth. Varroa mites is the next one, and here we can do a sugar test. I'm going to explain to you just briefly. You want to be using between 300 and 400 bees for this. You're going to be able to basically tip a bunch of bees into a mason jar, into a glass jar, secure the lid with a mosquito mesh top on it, okay, so that the bees can still breathe, but that you'll be able to add confectionery sugar to it. Gently shake the jar to cover the bees in the jar with powdered sugar. Let it sit for about 4 to 5 minutes. This is important because it needs time for the sugar to kind of warm up, and then it suffocates the mites, and then they release from their hold on the bees. And then what you do then is you turn the jar over gently and you swirl the jar around in a shallow amount of water to get the mites out of the jar a few times, and then lift it up, and then you can open up the jar, release the bees in front of the hive, and then you go back to counting how many mites you may or may not have just floating around in the water. And if it's any more than say 10 of those mites, you do want to be able to look at doing a treatment. And there are two ways at the moment of doing this. One is that you treat with oxalic acid spray inside the colony itself. Number two is that you can treat using the drone brood. This is a bit more natural way of doing it, but probably prolonged way of doing it as well. But essentially what you could do is in your brood chamber, you take one of your brood frames out, replace it with a super frame. Okay, and what will end up happening is the queen and the bees will will build comb in there that's drone comb, and the queen will lay drone eggs in there. They'll let that build out, and as and when the drone egg larvae, the drone cells are capped, the mites prefer drones and drone larvae to feed off of, so they go into the drone brood. And then what happens is as soon as that's capped, you can remove the entire frame, and then you just destroy the comb itself. You don't have to destroy the frame, you just remove the comb, the drone brood from that frame and destroy it. And if you repeat this process over a set of time, you will drastically reduce the number of mites in that colony and manage it properly. So those are the biggest things, guys. Beekeeping is important practice. Okay, it means you have to do things in order to protect your bees, the environment. It requires a great deal of care and maintenance, and but when you're doing it right and you're learning along the way and using resources like our channel that you've got and the links in the channel description below, your bees will be happy and productive, and then that makes you happy. So awesome. Finally, check out our full details on getting bees, getting started with beekeeping, and obviously caring more for your bees, because we've really wrapped this up in a super fast video. Check out Academy online, startbeekeeping.co.za. Look out for day 6, and when we talk about harvesting honey in our next video. And thanks for checking us out. Subscribe now for more videos to come, and check out our channel with other videos